Jezebel conjures up all kinds of images, I'm sure, when we hear the name, and yet we know that she was one of the persons in the Old Testament, in Scripture. And the problem was that she wasn't an Israelite. She was a foreigner, and so she worshipped Baal. We know Baal is not the God of Israel. We know that Baal is not our God. We know that Baal had his own prophets, and they couldn't even call him because he was busy when there was a test between Elijah and the prophets of Baal. She convinced Ahab to build a temple to Baal in Samaria, in the kingdom. And that was his first great sin. His second, obviously, was sitting aside and doing nothing while Jezebel arranged for him to take possession of a vineyard which didn't belong to him, which Naboth had every single right because it was his ancestry, it was his inheritance. And so he had no obligation to sell it or to give it over or to trade it. But Naboth went home and sulked like a little child, and Jezebel did his dirty deeds by having Naboth killed. She obviously didn't know the law of Deuteronomy, the law of Scripture. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, because as bad as that may sound to us, it is in Scripture a number of times. It's called the lex talionis, and it's based on retaliation and not vengeance. It was a law based on the Code of Hammurabi, who dated back to 2,000 years before Christ. And he created that law to do away with vengeance because people desired more, kind of like suing a company for spilling coffee that you know is hot in your lap. Kind of doesn't make sense, and yet we're into all kinds of suits against all kinds of companies for things that we know are dangerous and that we shouldn't do. I'm not saying that it's wrong, but nevertheless, it's exacting more than is your due. And so this law came up, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but Jesus comes along and he says, that's fine. However, because I'm teaching you a new commandment, and you're going to live by new rules and new guidelines called the Beatitudes and called charity, then you need to go beyond the law of retaliation, this lex talionis. And you need to be more holy and more charitable and more giving than the law requires of you, because you are called to something greater, not just this world that we live in, but to the eternal kingdom. And so Jesus says, when someone evil comes to you, do not resist them, because they may do more evil to you. But when someone strikes you on your right cheek, turn the other to him as well. That doesn't mean to sit back and let people just beat on you. But in offering the other cheek, it has to do with how someone would slap you in the face and how they would have to turn. And it would be a kind of movement that is not easy to just slap you on the other side. But nevertheless, you offer them that if they so desire, if they call for it. If someone wants to go to law with you over your tunic, hand him your cloak as well. The tunic was kind of like a white long garment like we would imagine Jesus wearing, and the cloak would be something that you put over that for protection from night winds and the cold and dust. And so to give someone your tunic would be one thing, because you'd have more tunics at home. I mean, after all, how many clothes do you have in your closet? But your cloak, however, was your protection. And most people only had one, especially the poor, the ones without means. And so to give your cloak was to give more of your possessions to the one who is asking you for a loan, to borrow something. And finally, if someone presses you into service for 1 while, go the distance, go longer with them. If someone in a position above you had asked you to do something with them, then you would be required to go with them because you were from a lower social standing. Jesus is saying, Don't just do the one thing they ask, but go beyond that, because you are different than they are. You are a follower of God. You are a disciple of the good news. You are a disciple of the Lord. And the Lord calls you to be loving and charitable. And so when we hear this, it's not that we turn away from those who want to do evil, but to go beyond, to show them that love is what guides us. Love is what maintains us. Love is the base of all that we say and all that we do. And so we hear the Lord telling us, go farther than what is asked, and more things will be given to you when you enter the kingdom.